Yo, yo, can you hear me? I'm looking up in
Sure.
space now, man.
Can you we can hear and see you.
There it is. All right. Hear
That's
and
good.
see. Obviously, everybody, I'm Joel Simmons in the cabin, in the woods. Just kidding. Background. That is your boy over there, Michael Seville, the real estate king guru, best friend of mine. He is a genius business mogul. Love
I'm,
him.
I'm more and more I'm starting to believe it.
All right.
More and more I'm really starting to align with the genius part of that introduction, but I appreciate it all. Guys, what's going on? It's Community Beacon. It's another Friday. It's 522 11/22 2024. So it's the week before Thanksgiving. Let me say happy Thanksgiving now because I'm sure I'll forget it. Yeah. I'm sure I'm going to forget it by next week, Thursday. So happy Thanksgiving. You all have a safe holidays. Definitely appreciate you guys for coming in each and every Friday and checking in. Those of you that do, we are here. We're Community Beacon. We're serving as a light to the world. We're doing our
Woo!
we're doing
That
our
was
part.
deep.
I,
That
it,
was
I
deep.
This is, what, brother, as the more and more as we go through, and this is like our third year, like consistency is out the window at this point in time. It's at least 3 years of us doing this Community Beacon show. So consistency is there, and the growth that has happened between it, and it's really forced growth when you think about it, because what we force ourselves to do is we force ourselves to come up with a plan that of things that are of interest to us. We come up with different topics that are, you know, to the community at large. We study it, we research it, we have these conversations. Iron sharpens iron. We come to different thought processes and we get to hear different perspectives. I mean, who else is doing, an hour a week minimum, let's say about an hour a week of going through these things and spend focus and effort on these things in order to come up with some type of conclusions or some, at least an understanding of these different topics that we have. And, not to toot our own horn, but there's a lot of jewels and gems that people go back throughout the years and the episodes as to, the thought process of these different things. People don't spend time doing this type of stuff. Like, this is growth. What does Tony Robbins call it? Oh my gosh, he had a word for it. It'll come to me. But it's constant improvement. Kaizen, that's what they called it. Kaizen is what he called it. I think the Japanese call it Kaizen. Constant and never-ending improvement. He calls it Kenai, but the actual term in Japan is Kaizen. All right, enough tooting our horn. We're getting into this leading through division.
Yeah.
Let me before we start. Man, I found out some news earlier this morning that I had a neighbor that was involved in the crash, the motorcycle crash. I think there were three officers involved in that. Two passed away. One, from my understanding, the last thing I heard was in critical condition. But one of them that passed away was a neighbor of mine. He actually did the photos, a Christmas photo shoot for me, maybe about 2 years ago on the golf course, because he was a photographer, did a lot of things, always going off to these different conventions to learn photography. He started off with nature photography, and then I said, man, I want to get some pictures done, and he said, hey, come on over. Awesome neighbor, always sat back and had conversations, and when we're out there, been with PBSO for a long time. So I definitely want to send my sincerest condolences to all the officers involved, but definitely, especially this one so close to home, with Luis Paez. Awesome neighbor, man. If I could be half the neighbor he was, I'd be okay. Captain. He trained everybody. I remember he was telling me about it. He used to train all the officers in Palm Beach County, probably a couple of different station departments outside of Palm Beach County, in the motorcycle training. Like, you had to go to him to get certified and to train and to become one in your department. So I'm sure a lot of different departments is feeling this loss because he's been with the PBSO, from my understanding, from what they put out for 36 years. But beyond just being an officer, just an awesome guy. We talked about a lot. So man, I'm definitely sending my condolences to him and his family. Like I said, I'll probably go visit them at some point in time this weekend to do it in person. But when it hit so close to home and listening, and the interesting part was, this is how I found out, was I saw it on Twitter that this had happened, and I had no idea it was him. Right? I just saw the officer. They showed the officer that was in critical condition, and that's all I knew. And so I was driving out of the neighborhood, the community today, and I saw a couple of sheriff officers in the neighborhood, and I stopped, and I was like, and I stopped. I said, and I asked him. I said, "Don't tell me it was my neighbor was involved in this, inside of it in this situation." And he was like, "Yeah." I'm like, I said, "So," he said, "I said he passed," and he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Man, this is, it's one of those things where death often comes unexpected at times, but man, this was like really, really unexpected." So definitely want to share my condolences with the family, man.
Yeah, and it's giving a shout out to Eusebius. Thank you, brother, for checking us out once again. Shout out to Eusebius. Want to tell you, man, we definitely appreciate you going back many, many years, many moons ago. You were our instructor and teaching us certain things, and we definitely appreciate you and the way that you had with your words. Appreciate you, brother. And I'm sorry, it wasn't captain. He was a corporal. Corporal. Uh,
Corporal, okay.
yeah, and then there was the deputy sheriff Ralph Butch Waller. Um, yeah, man. I mean, it's just this is crazy. So I guess the story is that a lady was driving down the road and overcompensated as she was trying to move into one lane and ran into three officers, all motorcyclists, and wiped all three of them out. And one of the witnesses stated that they saw bodies flying in the air. And so I know someone that I work with, one of my assistants, a and the youth explosion that we're putting on next year. We put on this year that we did in Revere Beach and one in Belglade. Um, she was telling me that she saw these men drive down the road, and later on she came up to the accident and then saw the men laying there on the ground. So this is it's a major impact. And I'm just saying, love out to the families. This is something else, because I think you made a great point when you were stating that life, where you were moving down that pathway of life, how life can be taken like that in an instant, in a moment. Earlier this week, we lost a couple of firefighters due to suicide. One of them being Danny Figueredo, and he used to be on my crew about 12 years ago and ended up down in Miami Beach. So it's like, how do these families get through these types of things? Where do they go? When we start talking about leading them through division, it's like there's trouble in the air sometimes, Mike. There's trouble in the air, and you have to be able to navigate through that trouble. And then on the opposite end, there's like real life happening.
Yeah.
Like what happened to these men, that's real life. Their families still have to repair, right? Children, wives, cousins, uncles, parents in some cases, because these men were so young, friends and families, neighbors. You know how you drop a rock in the middle of the lake, how far do the rings touch? And it's just like that. And just kind of like touching back on the leadership piece. It's like, well, what are we doing? Not just as being a leader, but as far as consoling, being compassionate, and helping these families to get through. And still, you have to navigate the political influence of the structure of your program, of your facility, of your job. Still, you have to take into account the social impacts of what's going on. These things are terribly difficult. I'll bring to you I'll bring to you mind one more situation. We had to fly a child out, maybe a couple weeks ago. Um, Child hit their head, started seizing, went unresponsive. So we arrived on the scene and we put together a flight. We called in the flight crew, got them to the LZ, and I was watching as this happened. One particular individual, um, there was one person who felt like it was their fault, and this one individual, went up and hugged them and said, "Hey, listen, right now, we're here to make sure that the child is all right. That's what we're here for. So we must be strong. It's not time for us to cry just yet. When we get through and we get to see how the child is doing and where we're going and what the doctors say, there will be plenty of time to cry. But right now, we got to keep it together." And that individual went from person to person to person that was with the family. And I shout out to my crew because they did an awesome job as far as the way that they handled the situation and the high intense stress level, um, dealing with that. And it was like everybody kind of worked like clockwork and helping compassionately each other. And, so the child ended up doing well. But it was that one individual, that one family member that rose up and became the leader and didn't allow for anyone to blame anybody for anything that went wrong. And it's like, if I could have given you that person's name, I would have, because what they did was, and at the end, I saw that individual had a lot on themselves. So I actually ended up going in. I gave that person a hug and I said, "Man, you're doing a wonderful job. You're a very strong leader, and I definitely appreciate you and what you're doing right now because I'm witnessing it." Everybody started thanking this person for leading them through this scenario, and the child ended up doing well. Shout out to, if I say your name wrong, my apologies, but Keisha, Monique, shout out to you. Appreciate you. You know, and I just watched that, and this is what we mean by like leading through division. It doesn't necessarily have to be um, you versus me type of thing, but it's when you have to go through the divide and you have to separate different aspects of what's going on in life and provide strong leadership and encouragement so that somebody else along with you is able to make it, you know, for lack of better words. So definitely sending my love out to those families, bro. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean this episode could easily be called "Leading Through Crisis." Like leading through crisis.
Yes.
It's essentially essentially the same thing. Like, why would you, like, you don't need a leader when there's no division. If everybody's just headed in the same direction, and no one necessarily needs to rise to task if there's nothing there. There's no, the crisis. This is kind of where you start to separate a lot of these different things. Um, I mean, let's go through some of the things that we need during these times, and we kind of spoke about it last week. This week, it's the same thing. Like this ends up being really simple, right? So preparation is one, and you can either be naturally this way, and it can also be learned, right? You can be nurtured in this kind of. You can learn. These are learned things that you can learn. You can do this ahead of time. You can be prepared for these things. Now, granted, someone passes away suddenly or tragically in some of these other cases. There's this accident that happened with the child. Like these things aren't planned for. but you tend to see the people who are the most prepared or who have experienced this before rising to the occasion. Um, so I'm curious because you spoke about I've been involved in these situations where there were tragic things happening, etc. And people can't put some of their feelings to the side in order to deal with it. Like sometimes we're more thinking about ourselves, and we don't have the empathy or the compassion to say, hey, in order for me to quote unquote rise to the occasion, I have to have some kind of um, lack of selflessness. Like something has to kick in. So for the person that was walking around and hugging these, is that something that's in preparation, or is it something that this person saw needed to be done, or is this a part of the what you guys do in these situations?
So in this case, I kind of took it upon myself. My thought process was I'm going to be that guy to help mitigate these types of things. Um, but the way that that particular individual stepped in, because that person was a part of the family, there's a
Okay.
difference. I'm not a part of the family, so my words, they touch a little bit differently. But when that particular individual actually did do that, they bridged the gap. This, brother, is something. This is preparation. This is curation. So when we start talking about empathy, and we start talking about compassion, leading with compassion, leading with empathy, leading with focus, leading with tenacity, leading with direction, leading with vision, right? When we start talking about these types of leadership skills, they don't always show up immediately. It's not something that, and I don't mean like the skills don't always show up, but the time where you present these skills doesn't always show up immediately. But when the time arrives, it changes everything, right? It changes everything. This is where you see the separation between one type of leader versus another type of leader. You see it right then and there in the midst of the crisis, in the midst of the divide. One individual begins to fail while another individual begins to prevail or excel. And people are making that at that very moment, people are deciding who truly is the leader. So there's some people that are still leading by fear. They're leading by fear. They're leading by control. They're leading by power. I have the authority. I am the father of the family. That means last word comes to me. I am the boss. I am the supervisor. I am. Well, I am can also be used in another way. I am the servant. I am the provider, right? And when we start talking about servant-based leadership, we're talking about an individual who is coming in a different mindset. They're coming to provide a service that benefits the people that are around them. And in a crisis-like situation, sometimes what you need can be a servant. It can be a servant. It can be someone who's there to deliver a service to you, to help you. And that doesn't mean that that service makes an individual weak, right? No, it doesn't mean that, because sometimes, like, think about it this way: going back to a police officer or a law enforcement officer, LE, when we are in the thick of it, going through some type of trouble, disturbance in a community or at a location where violence is striking up, we need a servant to show up. Maybe we don't have the power to protect ourselves. So you call for law enforcement and they show up to provide a service. When you get into an accident, um, like these men got into an accident, they needed for someone to show up, a servant to show up. So uh, they needed fire rescue, they needed an ambulance, they needed air rescue. These are all servants, right? So sometimes I believe that people, they get things twisted, and all of a sudden they take it out of context. I don't want to be the servant. I want to be the boss. Go ahead, bro.
No, I'm listening to you. I get it. I've seen people show up with this, uh, almost like a ego with this ego. They lead with the ego because I am, it could be I am the oldest, because I
Yes.
am, because I have the most money, because I, some type of authoritative way, and they're not necessarily fitting into the piece. But sometimes someone needs to take charge. I mean, sometimes we're looking around and we're like, someone needs to, um, handle this, and we don't. So, how do we pick? And it's interesting. I was just having a conversation. You kind of just heard the noise out of it as we ended it between me, my father, and my uncle. And we've been talking since, if my voice goes, this is the reason why. We've been talking since about 1 o'clock. We tend to be very loud if you're in the room, and if you're not used to it, there's certain aggressiveness. What I noticed during the conversation is that, my uncle's the oldest, then my father, and they're, double my age, right? Almost double my age. So what I noticed was that how we kind of deferred at times, because sometimes we're all talking at the same time, but you'll see like my uncle will tend to overpower the conversation because he's the oldest. And it's interesting how we kind of like defer it. So I think even within the leadership, as opposed to just coming and being there and saying, "Well, I'm the leader. I'm the one that's going to guide this thing." We kind of pay attention to the energies. We kind of pay attention to what the culture states. Culture is huge in leadership, right? Culture really is going to dictate the leaders, or how we kind of listen to one another or hear from each other, or taking direction from each other. And even within that, even though you're the older, what I found, what was awesome within the conversation, is that me and my uncle had possibly different views, because one may have had more information than the other, but the ability to take it all in. Because during the conversation, what he mentioned was like, "See, I can tell that you read a lot." He said, "So now I'm hearing information that I had never gotten before." Right. So when you start to hear someone who's 70 plus years old saying that, "Oh man, I'm getting new information because this younger guy is giving it to me," and being able to concede the fact that this is going on, to me, that shows like a humble leader, because technically in our culture, he's the leader because he's the oldest. And along with age, it's supposed to come some type of wisdom, but it's just the culture that's the oldest. But for the oldest, or the person who's supposed to be the presumed leader, to be able to take a step back and listen, because there's new information coming in, and to kind of think about their um and possibly, I don't say to change their thought process, but to be able to process this information, I think is huge.
Mm. Yeah, that is huge, man. That is huge. Shout out to Tom Slid. Appreciate you, man. Shout out to you, man, for checking in with us. Hey, what's your thought out there? What's your thought out there, Community Beacon World? What is your thought on what we're talking about here? Hey, so I want to chime in on the culture part, because I think that's a big deal, right? Culture is a big deal. So my family, uh, in my household, y'all, in my household, my wife is Cuban, and I'm black. And so there is a difference in how we do things. Lots of things that we do differently, but same. And I think that goes across the board. If we as people are able to find those narrowing focuses on the differences, I think that we should be able to walk a lot better together. But nonetheless, there's a difference in culture. There's a difference in music. I love the way there's a like a TikTok or Instagram, whatever, of Denzel Washington, when he's talking about, I think it was the movie The Fences, and he talks about how there's a cultural difference, and he gave the difference between like Scorsese, and the way that the reason why they were picked to design to produce a particular movie, and he was saying, as a black person, he understands what the smell of a hot comb hitting the hair on a Sunday morning. And so He was saying this is a cultural thing. And I love the way that he said it because he just like, he just, I mean, he just shut down the woke generation when he did this. And Denzel has got a habit of doing that, when people try to get him to collide with differences, he leads through them instead, and he brings up a certain scenario. So I love the way he did that. So in this culture and cultures, I'm thinking about it. Is like, you were mentioning how it dictates certain things because of the perspectives. And you've mentioned your Jamaican background multiple times and how men speak in a certain way. And, and you have to be able to rise and fall within those levels, within your culture, or you're an outcast. And I would assume that it's easily seen, right? So where there are cultures that blend, I'm sure, being a Caribbean style and the Cuban nature, it's the same thing. Men, there's a lot of machoism, machismo, and there's a lot of rising, right? So, and then as far as Black people, we speak loud. We get even more animated when we get excited about things. So, but you said something and it cued a change in culture. And you said that while you were speaking with your uncle, that he recognized the knowledge base that you were bringing to the table. And so you stated it was his humility. So it was his humility, which means that he cultivated humility. And it sounded as if maybe he did it through study or through experience or whatever else he might give to himself to have gotten to that point where he could listen the young guy, the younger generation, explain something that maybe he once thought he was perfectly sure about. And then you having the charisma and the ability to eloquently speak the words, communicate the words that he would be able to hear. So there was two different sides of the coin. Both of these things need to happen, but now we find that there is a way to bridge that culture difference through cultivating a different type of mindset, opening up our perspectives, learning to become more humble within inside of ourselves, within inside of our nature. And the truth of the matter is that we become leaders this way. This is a part of leadership that is left out in the workplace, it's left out in the government. And people believe that once you get into that supervisory role, that you automatically, because of the bars, as far as it goes within military, police, or fire, you got the bars, you got the bugles. That means that you should be speaking, and you're right, and you're wrong. I'm just telling you right now, you're wrong. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that at all. There's a saying amongst churchgoers that God doesn't always call the qualified, but he qualifies the called. So when we start thinking about these things, just because you get into the position doesn't mean you're qualified to do the work. Maybe you passed the test. You qualified to step in the shoes. You qualified to learn. You qualified to investigate. You qualified to grow. You qualified to become. But it doesn't always mean that you are yet. And I think that that's a huge take back, but it's also a place of growth.
I love it. It sounds like opportunity. Like you because you are in this position, you've been given the opportunity to lead. And you can do that in any kind of way. So we know we got some leaders that operate on a straight dictatorship. It's my way or the highway. And they don't take in new information. Those probably tend not to last very long. Right. If you're not taking in new information, it's my way or the highway. I'm just going to go off of what it is that I know and and not really taking advantage of access to different perspectives. You're not taking advantage of delegation. You're just not lead. You want to be known. You want to be the one in charge. So, and some people gain those positions because they're charismatic. They're charismatic and they're able to persuade people in that kind of way. once again, these are not long-lasting positions. So going back to how do we lead through during division? How do we lead during crisis when we're given the opportunity? You mentioned some words that communication. One of the things that we saw, especially when you're challenging people's beliefs and point of views, you start to get a shutdown on communication. It's hard to lead when the person is almost feels as if you're coming against their beliefs and their views. And the only way that you can kind of supersede that is through listening and understanding. Like, are you going to take the time out to do those different things?
Yeah, yeah. I like that. You said the how-to word, and I like that. John Maxwell. John Maxwell. He created something, and I think it kind of fits in right here. The 5 levels of leadership, and it was position, permission, production, people development, and then the pinnacle. Um, and he breaks it down. We talked about effective communication, and then the relationship building, developing strategic thinking, right? Decision making skills, change management, like getting into what's considered to be big momentum, but also production, right? Production. At some point in time, you can be as charismatic as you want to, but if you can't do the thing, then it's hard. It becomes difficult to lead people to do the thing that you can't do. And it doesn't mean that you always have to do it, but you have to be able to provide some type of result at some point in time. Like, if you're going to lead me into fixing a car, but you can't turn a wrench, this makes it difficult for me, to follow you. Like, you can be an excellent communicator, you can be compassionate. It's like, yes, I'm with you. Let's go. We'll fix any car that there is. But maybe I don't know how to fix a car at all. When I show up, I'm expecting for you to, like, all right, now you did the compassionate thing. You communicated well. You built this relationship. You think, obviously, you know how to build a business or whatever. Now, how do we actually fix the car? And you don't know how to fix the car. And so sometimes I believe that this is one of the issues. People get into these leadership roles and they don't actually know how to do the doggone thing. They don't know what they're doing, and all of a sudden there's an old saying, fake it until you make it. But then when you make it and you're still faking it, then all of a sudden somebody is following you and you can't lead them to the door.
Let me stop this. So you're saying, are we dispelling this, that there's no such thing as faking it until you make it, or you shouldn't fake it until you make it? I know we have these sayings, but how?
Yeah, we do have these sayings, don't we?
I'm trying to figure out how true these sayings are. To fake it until you make it, I think it's foolishness. I found out that a while just because of that. That we're talking about now. We're talking about competence. We're not being competent, and not only are we not being competent, but we're not also figuring out ways of how to be competent. We're
I,
not putting in the study. We're not learning on the other end.
let me answer that though, Mike. Let me let me answer that. Right. So I believe that there's a difference between faking something until you arrive at a position of power so that you can tell other people what to do, than just starting to believe in yourself. It's like, I know I don't know how to do this, but I know that I will learn how to do this. And then providing yourself with the tactics that it takes. Like, read the book.
At least.
Go to the person that does it. Learn it. Practice it at home, right? If we're doing that, then I don't know. I mean, if you want to call that fake it until you make it, then I'll subscribe to that. Myron Gold, I'll subscribe to that. But if you're just going to fake it, you're going to put the uniform on, but not have anything inside of your mind, and not practice it, not learn anymore, not apply yourself, you need to get out of the way. That's where I'll leave it.
So there's no. So I mean, maybe this is another show, but there's a lot of different. There, there are a lot of sayings that we really need to take a look at because they make, when you really put it into practice or process it, they don't make sense. It's really some made up phrases that someone made up that it sounded good, and we're using it. There's a method to it, and maybe at one point in time, like what you mentioned, fake it until you make it. There's more to it than that. There's Last week we spoke about studying till you show yourself proven,
Approved.
approved. That's a part of this, right? That's a whole different thing because I can see the potential in you to be something. If I'm, if I'm going to hire you or put you in a position, but it just doesn't stop there. Like maybe you came to this interview. Let's keep with this example. You came to the interview and what I saw was someone who's capable of doing it. And I might
Mm.
say, well, I don't know if they have the technical knowledge now, but I'm sure if they put their mind to it, they can do it, right? But then you get it, and then it stops. Like that's really when the work began. It's starting to begin because now this is when you're going to study to show yourself approved. You're going to go in. You're going to learn this information. You're going to apply the information. You're going to allow yourself to make mistakes. You're going to reward yourself when you get results. But there's a whole process to it. Leadership is similar to that. There's times when things happen, and especially in the crisis or division, like we don't know what. Like this just came out of left field. It happens all the time. Now it's like, are you going to rise to the occasion? So what does that take? Now are we talking about, which is another word I don't like, but does it take resilience? Like what, like in the moment that these things are happening, how do I rise to the occasion as a leader? I mean, I know how to do it, but I'm wondering if is it a nature thing? Because some people get to to a pinnacle and they crumble, right? Some people really don't want, the quote unquote smoke. Some people are like, whoa, I didn't know the lights were this bright. You ever seen someone who you're like, man, this guy's ready for a fight. This is boxing. He's ready for the fight. He looks real good, practice. During practice, he looks really good and gets into the fight. And they're like, wait a minute. It's a whole different ball game. I heard there's a boxer out of where all the boxers come from, it seems. Him and Mike Tyson came out of the same place. Shannon Briggs. Shannon Briggs said it's during practice, and I'm a boxer. I'm probably a lot better than most people in the gym. I'm the champ. They call him champ. He had a couple heavyweight titles for a while. He says, but man, when you start climbing up those stairs, things change. So what is it? What should we be working on that when the occasion comes, the crisis comes, you notice the division? What are the things that we should be working on in order to, to become the leader that we want to be?
Mm. I like it, man. I like it, Mike. I think I think that's somewhat of a loaded question because I think that it depends on the route that you're headed and what you want to be in life. If we're talking about being the best father, then I think you need to be studying how to be a parent, how to be a father, how to be a coach, how to be a friend to a child, how to be a mentor. You need to be studying these things. You need to study, what it means to be resilient, what it means to be able to plant seeds and then to nourish them. I think that you need to be able to understand trajectory. You need to be able to see certain things that are happening that could possibly lead to something else. You also need to become a patient individual because simply because you see something happening inside of someone today does not mean that it is inevitable that they will become something else tomorrow. Some people need to go through dark days in order to see the bright days. And sometimes you need to allow for your children to go through those things so that they can learn the lesson of the storm. Many times we shelter our children from the storm. And when the time comes that they go through a storm without us, they don't even know how to put a raincoat on. They don't even know what an umbrella is. And they get caught in the storm. I'll tell you this, a long time ago, myself and my boy Snoop, Sam, him and his little brother, we all got caught in a rainstorm. It was raining. This is what we call cats and dogs. It was raining so hard that we had to literally run because the rain was like going through us. That's the way it felt. It was raining with such ferocity that it was moving through us. You couldn't even see the because it was raining, and we knew the area, so we knew over there's shelter, and so the three of us started running. At least that's what we thought. I got there, Snoop got there, his brother was lost in the storm.
Wow.
So we had to go back out there and find him and bring him back, and bring him to the shelter. And it's like, this is a true saying, for us, having been more experienced, understanding the terrain, understanding the surrounding, also having enough confidence to battle through a storm, it made it easier for us. But for him, being years younger than us, he was not prepared. He didn't understand that. He thought he was going to die. He couldn't breathe out there. The storm was literally taking his ability to breathe away from him. He was literally out there drowning in rain. And this is never has it ever happened to me again. This is many years ago, many moons, right? But it was just, it's like you have to prepare. So the Navy SEALs said this, right? At least it's attributed to the Navy SEALs. And that is, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. And basically what that means is that when you're faced with a high pressure situation, you don't magically improve, right? And it doesn't happen. Your performance doesn't it's not like abracadabra, I'm all that. Instead, what ends up happening is that you eventually revert. You go back to the highest level of skill and preparedness that you've ever developed. You call on things that you know are working, things that you know are sure. And so their thought process is essentially you are failing to your standard. You're not exceeding it. You're failing to your standard. So you're gonna get to the best of whatever you left. If you didn't practice becoming good at whatever that thing is, then when the time of the pressure actually arrives, you're not going to have the tools.
You better believe it.
To do the work that is necessary. You have to have those tools first. And I'll end this statement with this. My old pastor, he used to tell me, he said, he would always talk about the Bible. He said, did you read the whole Bible? Did you read the whole Bible? And I was like, you know what? I've read the whole Bible, but I never read it from front cover to back cover. I've always read, I read straight through, and then I would stop, and then I'd go and I read Revelations. And then I would go back and I read all the way through the New Testament. Then I stop and I go back and I read Isaiah. And I was always doing like that. So I've covered the whole Bible, but I never read straight through. But he said, well, that's good. It didn't matter to him. Whether you read straight through or you read here and there, it didn't matter. Study to show thyself approved. But his point is that you have to have the entire thing in you, because when the day comes when you need it, God has to be able to go inside of you and pull out what you've placed in so that you can see it, use it, and be fruitful with it. But if you never put it in, God can't bring it out. And I was like, man, that's dope.
I think this entire that was the gym. This entire thing was dope. Like, this is that you bringing that out answered the question, and essentially that's what I'm going to take out of this, of everything we talked about a lot. But it's you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of what was it? You
standard.
Fall to your level of standard. So you say you fail to your standard. You know what I mean? Like, for some reason, people think that when it's the time, I'm going to be able to, if it had to happen, I would be able to run this mile. Like because we hear these stories. Oh, well, that one time when when the car fell on the baby. I'm sure you heard this story. I heard it a lot growing up. Then the woman lifted the car up off of the baby because she got this extra hormone, this rush of adrenaline, or when this bear is chasing you, you were able to outrun the bear. Like all these crazy things that we heard of these things. We don't necessarily know these things to be true, and they're great stories. I'm not saying that adrenaline does. You're not going to get an adrenaline kick, but I'm going to tell you this: if you're in a sporting event and you think that you can just go out there and run or compete with these guys who have been training for weeks upon weeks, and you just go out there thinking that I'm going to compete with them, by the time you do, by the time you're about halfway through the round or the quarter or whatever it is, you go over to the sideline. No matter how much talent you have, and I've seen it happen over and over again. A kid that played basketball and he was off the chain, really good on street ball, but when it was time to get in there with those athletes that had been running up and down for the past how many weeks doing these suicides, I was getting ready for it. He got in there for about a half a minute and he looked like he was about to pass out because it's gonna supersede it. You're not gonna rise to the occasion now. It just doesn't happen. And to tell you what, this happens in everything. Like we're talking about the family life. Like when crisis and division happens, you're going to fall to what you actually are. You're going to become you're going to become your standard of what you upkept. You're not all of a sudden going to be this super savior able to talk through anything because these emotions are going around. These emotions are flying back and forth. And these feelings are happening and you're actually going through it. And like, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do. You know what I mean? So here's a word, and Beethoven said it today, and I was like, that's the word. The poise. When you're training and you start to up your level of standard, you start to see the poise that you have as all these things start to occur. These things that quote unquote come out of left field. You're not to say that you're necessarily ready for them, but you can stand them, and you can stand them with poise. You don't look like you, and that's one of the things about being a leader, especially when other people are watching you. Like, how poised is this person? If this person starts to panic, then all hope is lost. You got to be the leader, the general in charge that has his poise and saying, it's time to retreat, but not screaming and running in different directions. It's more like and I'm sure you've seen the movies, it's more like a fall back. It's time to fall back. The poise when you can call that timeout when things are going crazy. Oh man, these people made a run for it. I need to call a timeout and get us back together to go back and do it again. Being a leader doesn't mean that you're taking all these wins, right? Like it's not like this is you're going through and you're unscathed and what we believe it to be. Leaders take losses. How are you taking these losses? What are you doing during the loss? Like this is what's going to show the true character of an impressive leader. Like while we are weathering this storm, what does it look like? I'm going to look to the person, if I'm looking for a leader, who's going to be the most poised during this time. And if I'm not the most poised, then that makes it even more, okay, this person's more poised. He may need to take control of this ship until I get it together. If it's, you know what I mean? So man, that was awesome. That's a good place to end.
Mm. Yeah, man. I definitely think I agree with you. I did think about something that just while you're talking about it, I'm trying to remember all of the details specifically, but I remember it was called Bloody Sunday, right? Bloody Sunday, March the 7th, 1965. 600 civil rights marchers, heads or tails, that number, headed east out of Selma on U.S. Route 80. And they got to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and 6 blocks away, state and local lawmen attacked them with billy clubs and tear gas, right? And the thing about it is that they tried to cross the Edmund Pettus this bridge a couple of times, but it wasn't successful, right? The thought that at one point in time, MLK Jr. decided to fall back is powerful. Because on one occasion they got beat, on another occasion they fell back, and on another occasion they prevailed. And what you were just saying made so much sense. As a leader, you have to know, you have to be okay with falling back when it's the appropriate time. You got to know the difference. Like, you're not always supposed to charge forward into death. You're not always supposed to charge forward into danger. And sometimes you are. And it's like you have to make that decision as the leader. And that, it came to my mind. I was like, that, yeah, we need to close on that. We need to drill that home, because too many, I see it in youth, so I'm not trying to call young people out, but I see it because there's a mindset where I have to be, especially young men, I have to be strong. I have to present myself a certain way. And so in order for me to do that, that means never back down. Never back down. Fight every single time. Show, and it's like, but that's not always what the leader must do. Sometimes you need to step back. Sometimes you need to pause. Sometimes you need to sidestep. Sometimes you need to talk your way through. Sometimes and you have to have all of that stuff inside of you, because it is what gives you the poise.
Mm-hmm.
That the poise is not just, oh, let me just stand still and look good. No, there's something going on inside of a leader when it's true poise. You can see it in their eyes. You can feel it in their aura if you're paying attention. Some people, they can't pay attention worth a lick, and they're going to try to over talk your thoughts as a leader. But when people really, really get in tune with you, they'll say, oh, just give them a moment.
Yep.
It's happening. You're witnessing it happen right now. Whatever is going on, whether it's a prayer, a thought, a plan, an improvisation, whatever is about to come out is going to shock everybody, because it's not going to be what, in many cases, what people thought. And that is what is happening in the poise. That's the piece of leadership that must be developed, cultivated. And here's the other thing, Mike, is like, because you were giving certain points about like this intense strength, like I saw the video one day of the man who picked up the helicopter, and you barely even see it move, like an inch. You barely see it move. But they pulled the guy out, and it's like, okay, I get it. I saw another video where like 30 people came around and picked the car up, and they, saved the person from underneath it. And it's like, preparation does not always look like the direct result. It doesn't always look that way. But it is preparation. I mean, you put water on a seed, it doesn't look like a stem, nor does it look like a branch or a leaf or a fruit. That's all I got. Woo! 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 Somebody gonna think something after that picture right there.
Listen.
Poise.
I'm just saying, it came to mind. It came to mind. There's a powerful, iconic picture to go down in history, and that, to be poised enough in order to be able to execute that, not many people did it. I heard, who else was good was I heard Ronald Reagan was pretty good. He was a pretty poised guy. I've always heard. I saw when the guy threw the shoe at Bush that one time. I don't know if you remember. They threw a slipper at him, and he dodged it like twice. Uh, but you got, a lot of our presidents were poised. Obama was pretty poised. I've seen him handle, disrespectful people in a certain kind of way. So, man, I love it. I love it. Guys, that's it. If you have any thoughts, any comments on what we had going on here, definitely put it in the chat or comment on it. We appreciate everyone who shouted us out and came through and gave us a like and is viewing us. I think this is time well spent, man. Until next time, I say peace.